Due to restructuring, your position is being eliminated. That was it. No build-up, no warning, no eye contact. Julia didn't even look up from her tablet as she delivered the line. Her voice was flat, polished, rehearsed, cold. After 19 years with Northmere Dynamics, that's how it ended for me. A single sentence in a sterile conference room, fluorescent lights humming above, the blinds drawn tight like the truth they were trying to bury. I sat across from her in a chair I'd picked out myself during a budget review 10 years earlier. I remembered how the manufacturer's rep had praised its ergonomic design. Funny how something designed for comfort could feel so unsteady now. Damon, the HR rep, cleared his throat and slid a cardboard box across the table like it was a birthday gift instead of a coffin for a career. "We'll need your key card and parking pass," he said without meeting my eyes. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items." I looked at him, then at Julia. Her fingers were tapping on the tabletop, sharp nails clicking against glass. The rhythm was fast, impatient. She wanted this over. I nodded once. Didn't argue, didn't plead. I adjusted my tie, an old habit, and stood, lifting my leather portfolio from the floor. That portfolio had traveled with me through mergers, acquisitions, audits, and budget cuts. My wife Diane had given it to me 15 years ago, back when we still thought we had time. Before cancer, before silence, before work became my way of surviving her absence. "Is there anything you'd like to say, Patrick?" Julia asked, her voice laced with artificial civility. She expected outrage, a parting shot, maybe even tears. "No," I said evenly. "Thank you for the opportunity." I turned and walked to the door. Kyle, the security guard, waited awkwardly in the hallway. He looked young, too young to understand what 19 years feels like when they're yanked away in the span of 10 minutes. I gave him a nod. He nodded back, sympathetic. As we walked down the corridor, past the glass offices where people suddenly found their keyboards fascinating, I kept my back straight. Let them look away, let them forget me. They thought I was leaving with nothing. What they didn't know was, I was leaving with everything they didn't want found. The portfolio felt heavier than usual as I walked toward my office for the last time. Maybe it was the weight of memory. Diane had given it to me the Christmas before her final round of treatment. She'd wrapped it in silver paper and tucked a handwritten note inside. "For the man who keeps everything in order." That was her, always knowing what to say, even as her body betrayed her. I never changed that portfolio, never needed to. It carried more than spreadsheets. I closed my office door behind me. Kyle waited just outside, silent. My fingers moved automatically. The desk drawer, the tissue, paper for Diane's photo, the careful packing of the framed recognition plaques, the fountain pen I used to sign every budget report. I moved slowly. Let them wait. When I reached for the portfolio, I paused. Inside the zippered sleeve was a flash drive. Small, matte black, labeled in my handwriting, N19 full. 3 years of careful entries. Every vendor payment that didn't match inventory. Every wire transfer routed through a name I didn't recognize. Every quarterly audit Julia had mysteriously canceled. I'd cross-checked them all, logged timestamps, saved PDF exports, pulled approval chains. They thought I didn't see. They thought I was the kind of accountant who followed quietly until he was led out the back door with a cardboard box. What they didn't know was that I'd been watching them long before they ever looked in my direction. Not out of bitterness, but out of habit. Numbers don't lie. People do. That's what Harold used to say. And lately, the people had been lying a lot. As I zipped the portfolio shut and slid it under my arm, I didn't feel broken. Not even betrayed. What I felt was stillness. The kind you get before a storm breaks. They thought this was over. But the leather portfolio I carried out of that office wasn't just sentimental. It was loaded. The early years felt different. Solid. Like standing on bedrock. When I joined Northmere, it wasn't a corporation. It was a family business. You felt it in the way Harold Northmere shook your hand, firm, with eyes that saw right through pretense. He wasn't a man of many words, but the ones he chose stuck. Numbers don't lie, Patrick. People do. Your job is to make sure our numbers tell the truth. He'd say it every morning as he walked the floor, clipboard in hand, before he even had his first sip of coffee. I carried those words like armor. Back then, we'd gather in the break room on Fridays. Harold would ask about our kids, remember your wife's name, bring donuts from that tiny place on Sycamore that always sold out by 10. There was pride in the work, in balancing the books down to the cent, in knowing every figure that left my desk was clean, honest, and traceable. We didn't need performance slogans or branded coffee mugs. Integrity was assumed. When Harold finally retired, we stood in the warehouse under a string of paper lanterns and toasted him with lukewarm champagne. He cried. So did half the line workers. I remember shaking his hand one last time. "Keep the books clean, Patrick," he said. "It's the only thing that outlasts a name on the building." But it didn't. Not really. His son sold the company less than a year later. Venture capital firm, new mission statement, new logo, and soon new people. Ones with polished resumes and buzzwords in their back pockets. Julia arrived with her tight smiles and bullet-pointed visions. Damon followed with his spreadsheets full of euphemisms. Optimization, synergy, culture, rebalancing. The shift was slow at first, less about what changed than what disappeared. A name on a vendor list, an extra step in the approval chain, a quiet goodbye from someone you trusted. And in that silence, I started to hear Harold's voice again. Numbers don't lie. People do. It started with a name I didn't recognize on a vendor invoice. Nothing major, just a line item buried in the Q3 statement for a service we'd never used before. Consulting, Everite Partners. The amount wasn't egregious, but it didn't match any contract I'd reviewed. I flagged it, copied Julia, and asked for clarification. No response. A week later, I tried again. Still nothing. By the third request, Damon replied with a 3-word email. Handled. No issue. That was the beginning. Next came the bonuses. Not the annual ones, those were publicly tracked, shareholder approved. These were discretionary. Tucked beneath vague line items, labeled as retention incentives or strategic adjustments. They showed up on ledger trails that looped through departments no longer required to report directly to finance. When I asked about those, I was told we were streamlining approvals. I'd been at Northmere long enough to know when the numbers didn't speak right. I started logging them, date stamping everything, saving backups to a private drive. At first I didn't know what I was looking for, just that something was off. Then the changes became harder to ignore. Departments were consolidated. Review cycles were automated. Legacy systems, ones I had helped build for transparency, were sunsetted overnight without notice. A few longtime colleagues asked quiet questions. One by one, they either resigned or were retired early with severance packages and blank eyes. Greg from purchasing came to my office with a stack of invoices. "Some of these parts don't exist," he whispered. "They're buying air." 2 weeks later, he was gone. Performance issues, they said. I tried to bring it up again more formally this time. Attached spreadsheets, documentation. My emails went unanswered. I was removed from 2 financial oversight committees and reassigned to a special projects ledger that didn't actually exist. By the time I noticed Damon's nephew in a meeting about capital approvals, someone fresh out of undergrad, sitting, and decisions he didn't understand. I knew what this was. They weren't just restructuring departments. They were dismantling the truth, bolt by bolt. The house was exactly as I'd left it that morning, but something about it felt different now. A little quieter, a little colder. I set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter, its contents too personal to be packed so impersonally. The photo of Diane, wrapped in tissue, stared up at me from between a stapler and my nameplate. I left it untouched and reached for the bottle of whiskey I kept for anniversaries and long-forgotten celebrations. Poured 2 fingers, sat down. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It hummed with everything I couldn't say out loud. The phone rang. Ellie. Dad. Tina from accounting just called me. She said you were let go. What happened? I stared at the framed family photo on the wall before answering. Restructuring. Position eliminated. Standard corporate script. That's bull, she snapped, lawyer instincts rising fast. They can't do that without cause, not after 19 years. We should sue. I took a sip, let the warmth spread through the hollow behind my ribs. No lawsuits. Why? Not because some battles aren't fought in courtrooms. There was a pause on her end. A long one. Then, are you okay? I looked around the room, at the worn spot in the hardwood where Diane used to stand while cooking, at the light over the sink she always meant to replace. I will be. We hung up. I took the flash drive from my leather portfolio and held it between my fingers. 3 years of names, dates, and decisions that added up to something darker than creative accounting. I opened my laptop, pulled up the email addressed to the SEC and the state attorney's office. My cursor hovered over the send button, then I closed it. Instead, I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an old photo album. There we were, Diane and me at the company picnic, Harold standing beside us with a paper plate in one hand and a ledger in the other. Real leadership didn't hide behind spreadsheets. It stood in the sun. The morning sun cut across my kitchen table like a scalpel. I watched the dust in the air, slow and aimless, while my coffee turned cold. I'd barely slept. The faces in the old photo album had followed me into my dreams. Harold with his tie askew, Diane holding Ellie as a toddler, and me, standing behind them all, thinking the future was steady, predictable. I took a breath and picked up my phone. The number hadn't changed in 30 years. James Parker, came the voice on the other end. Crisp, alert. It's Patrick Greer. A pause, then warmth. Patrick? Wow, it's been too long, I said. But this isn't a catch-up call. He heard it in my voice. The past dropped away. You got a minute? For you? Always, I explained everything, not all the details, not yet. Just the scaffolding, the vendor inconsistencies, the phantom consultants, the altered audits, Julia and Damon's maneuvering, the flash drive. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "You've got something, but you already knew that. What I need to know," I said, "is if it's enough." Another pause, this one longer. Your documentation is interesting. It's tight, it's organized. But from a legal standpoint, we'd need more. This looks like embezzlement, yes. Fraud, likely. But these companies lawyer up the moment you say the word investigation. A spreadsheet can be dismissed. Context can be distorted. So what do you need? Someone inside, someone current, who saw it happen, who helped, or was told to help, and regretted it. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I already knew who I had to call. I'll be in touch, I told him. As I hung up, I looked down at the empty coffee mug, the flash drive beside it, and the quiet house that had once been a home. The game had changed. I wasn't just the accountant anymore. Now, I was the threat. The gravel crackled beneath my tires as I pulled into my brother's cabin, an old cedar-built retreat nestled in the woods outside St. Louis. The house was empty this time of year, the windows dark and quiet. He wintered in Florida now. I hadn't asked permission. I didn't need to. Teresa arrived 10 minutes later, her eyes darting to the tree line as she stepped out of her car. She looked thinner than I remembered, drawn, tight like a wire pulled too far. We didn't waste time on greetings. Inside, she paced the floor of the main room while I shut the blinds and turned off my phone. She didn't sit. "They're calling it a full audit," she said, arms crossed. "But it's a cover job. I've seen it happen before, but never like this. They're rewriting approval logs, backdating invoices, creating trails that were never there. It's not just fraud anymore. It's surgery." She reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. Small, silver, unremarkable. "This is everything I've been able to pull without raising alarms. System logs, procurement approvals, budget histories. You'll see the original entries." Then the same files again, overwritten 2 days later. Vendor names changed, amounts inflated. And the worst part? She paused, looked me in the eye. They're falsifying quality certifications. For parts going into government contracts. I exhaled slowly. There's more, she added. I wasn't the only one noticing things. Drew, from quality control, he started asking around about the Bentonville order. I nodded. Good guy. Meticulous. He's gone. What do you mean gone? Disappeared. A week before you were fired, no resignation email, no farewell. His badge never turned in. HR says he resigned, but his desk was cleared overnight. No one's heard from him since. The cabin felt colder. Teresa looked down at the floor. I shouldn't have come. You did the right thing, I said. No, she whispered. I just don't know if it's safe anymore. Neither did I. That night, the street outside my house felt too quiet. Not peacefully quiet. Watchful. A silver sedan idled across. The road, lights off. Engine faintly humming. I watched it from behind the curtains, unmoving. No one got out. No one had to. The following morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even poured my coffee. The message was brief. No name, no punctuation. Back off. We know about the flash drive. I didn't respond, didn't need to. The next hour answered it for me. First came the email alerts. Over a dozen subscription confirmations to services I'd never signed up for. Pet food deliveries, tech gadget trials, 1-hour billing cycles. Then came the bank call. Someone had attempted to access my checking account using my social security number. They failed the authentication checks, but just barely. The worst part was what I found when I went into my home office. The window, one I never opened, was ajar. Just slightly, enough to let in a breath of cold January air. Enough to remind me this wasn't some digital scare tactic. Someone had been here. I checked the files. Nothing missing. But the desk drawer I kept locked sat open. The lock still, intact, untouched, but the contents had been carefully moved. Not stolen, just disturbed, rearranged, like someone wanted me to know they'd been there. I stood in the center of that room, hands still at my sides, the silence pressing in like, oh wait, they weren't just trying to stop me. They were making it personal, not with lawsuits or legal threats and with shadows, with whispers, with things left slightly out of place, things meant to crawl under your skin and take root in your sleep. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark with the lights off, listening to every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside the glass. They wanted me to be afraid. I was. But fear wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The call came just after midnight. The number was unfamiliar. The voice, barely above a whisper, was distorted with fear and static. But I recognized it. Patrick. It's Drew. I stepped out onto the back porch, phone clutched tight, eyes sweeping the darkened neighborhood. Where are you? Are you okay? There was a pause, the kind filled with things unsaid. I don't have long, he breathed. Listen carefully. The Bentonville contract, they're falsifying test results. Certification documents are forged. The parts going out, they're defective. Military vehicles, Patrick. If someone doesn't stop them. His voice cracked, breaking open something hollow in my chest. People will die. Then silence. A deadline, no goodbye, no location, nothing. I stood there for a long time, phone still pressed to my ear, the wind sliding across my skin like cold breath. This wasn't about audits anymore, or padded expense reports. This was blood money. Fraud dressed up in engineering specs and line items. I called James. I just got a call from Drew, I said, skipping formalities. The company's falsifying safety reports on military contracts. Faulty equipment, vehicles, we're talking about national defense, lives. The shift in his tone was immediate. Steel cutting through sleep. You're sure? Positive, he sounded terrified. We're not dealing with white-collar crime anymore, he said. This falls under the Department of Defense. I'll make the call. But Patrick, this is going to escalate. Fast. Let it, I said. 3 hours later, I was in a government building downtown, seated across from two men in dark suits who didn't waste time with small talk. I handed them Teresa's flash drive, the cross-referenced files, the manipulated audits, and now Drew's warning. One of the agents looked up. "Mr. Greer, this is no longer an internal investigation. This is national." I nodded once. "Then let's treat it that way." Because this wasn't just about my job, or even Harold's legacy anymore. This was about the people who would never see it coming, unless someone stood up before the damage became irreversible. 6 months later, I stood inside the old manufacturing floor again. The air still smelled like steel and lubricant, the heartbeat of machines pressing metal into something useful, something built to last. But the tension that once clung to every surface like static was gone. Northmere Dynamics had been placed in receivership during the investigation. What followed was a quiet miracle. With help from the state's Economic Development Fund, a coalition of longtime employees pooled their resources, grit, and savings to purchase the manufacturing division. They renamed it Northmere Legacy Manufacturing. They didn't want to forget what had happened. They wanted to remember it properly. Not as a cautionary tale, but as a resurrection. A return to something that mattered. They asked me to help rebuild the financial systems from the ground up. Systems with oversight, audit trails, employee transparency. No smoke, no mirrors. Just numbers that told the truth. It wasn't a title I wanted. It was a responsibility I accepted. The first day I walked back through those doors, I didn't wear a tie. Didn't need to. I carried only a single folder, and the photo of Harold. Northmere I'd had framed. I hung it in the new break room right above the attendance board. Kyle, the security guard who once escorted me out with a cardboard box, greeted me at the entrance. "All done for the day, Mr. Greer?" I smiled. "Just about." He handed me a visitor badge, more out of formality than necessity. But this time his hand didn't shake, and he called me sir. As I signed out, I looked back one last time at the machines humming in steady rhythm. Honest work from honest hands. Harold would have been proud, not because we survived the betrayal, but because we refused to let the lie be the last thing written in the ledger. The cardboard box that once held the remains of my career sat open on the dining table, waiting to be emptied one last time. Old files, thick folders, a few worn notebooks with handwritten ledger notes. I sorted through them slowly, methodically, the way I used to sort numbers. No urgency, just clarity. Some things I shredded, irrelevant now. Others I archived in a fireproof safe, not because I needed them anymore, but because stories, even painful ones, deserve to be kept whole. Ellie stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Her expression unreadable. "Any regrets?" she asked. I paused, looked up at her. She'd grown into a force of her own, sharp, steady, her mother's eyes. "No," I said. "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because it was right." She nodded once and walked over to help me with the files. We worked in silence, the kind that's easy between people who understand each other. Later, after she left, I stood at the window with a glass of bourbon in hand, the bottle unopened since the night I got fired. The sun was setting behind the trees, bleeding gold through the slats. I thought about Harold, about Diane, about the workers on that floor who deserved more than smoke and mirrors. Tomorrow, I'd start as a consultant with the Manufacturing Ethics Alliance. Not a flashy title, but a meaningful one. My job would be to help other companies build financial systems that couldn't be tampered with, firewalls against the kind of people who saw numbers as tools to bury the truth. As I sipped, I walked to the shelf and picked up the photo from Diane's last birthday. Her smile, warm and weary, still anchored me. She'd hated liars, loved honesty in its simplest form, a bill paid on time, a promise kept, a spreadsheet that balanced. "Numbers don't lie," I whispered. And now they finally speak. The glass clinked softly as I set it down. Tomorrow would be about rebuilding. Tonight was about closing the books, not with anger, not with vengeance, just the quiet peace of a ledger that finally told the truth.